This presentation is about the idea of inflation, what it is and how we measure it. Inflation is simply the rise in prices over time. Of course, an economy produces many types of goods, and their prices don't have to be going up at the same speed. So we tend to segregate the goods that an economy makes. We tend to separate them into different groups, and we measure the inflation in each group. So the inflation rate is the speed with which prices are rising over time. So here we're talking about the speed of increase of prices, and the inflation rate is usually given as a percentage. So for example, if we say that the rate of inflation is 3%, we mean that prices are generally rising at 3% per year. So what kind of inflation are we talking about? Well, as we said before, an economy produces several types of goods, several categories of goods. So inflation has many forms. For example, if we're only concerned with the types of goods that we consumers buy on the high street, then we can talk about consumer price inflation. If we are interested in how much we are earning from our jobs and whether that's going up over time or not, we can talk about wage inflation. Of course, for those of us who own houses, we would be very interested to see how fast the price of houses is rising in our area or in our country. And here we can talk about house price inflation. So depending on the type of good or the thing that we are talking about, we can have different measures of inflation, such as consumer price inflation, wage inflation, and house price inflation. Each type of inflation is measured by an index number. So for example, with goods that we buy on the high street, we calculate a number called the Consumer Price Index, or CPI. An index number is basically one number that summarizes or sums up the prices of a whole different set of goods, so a set of goods. So the CPI index, for example, includes hundreds of goods that consumers buy every month or every week. And it is calculated from the prices of those hundreds of goods. As the prices of those goods go up, so will the CPI. So that's the idea of an index number, a number that actually tells us about a lot of other numbers in a convenient way. There are, of course, other index numbers, such as the Producer Price Index, or PPI. This is an index of the prices of raw materials, such as steel and concrete. This is useful for companies that use raw materials, such as companies in the construction industry, and they can predict or forecast what their cost of raw materials is going to be in the future by looking at what the PPI has been doing recently. And of course there is the UK House Price Index, which shows how fast house prices are rising in different areas of the country. So this is an index that can be produced for certain geographical areas, and the speed of change of house prices will be different in different areas of the country. So let's see how we actually express the inflation rate. Imagine that the CPI in the UK in 2007 had a value of 702, and then in the next year it had a value of 756. The change in the CPI, the change in the index, is 7.7%. And this is the inflation rate. So this is how we measure or express inflation. It's the percentage change in the relevant index number. So if we are measuring a consumer price inflation rate, we would express it as the percentage change in the consumer price index from one year to the next year. So why do we measure inflation? We can see how we measure it, but the question is, why do we measure it? And the basic answer is that knowing the inflation rate helps us to design economic policies that are useful to control the inflation rate. We will see in later presentations that inflation is quite dangerous for the economy. As the prices of goods start to go up, this can cause some problems if the inflation rate is too rapid. So some inflation, as we will see, is good for the economy, but inflation which is very rapid or fast can do a lot of damage. So therefore we need a measure of the inflation rate. And this is the usefulness of the measures we have discussed. So in summary, we sum up inflation using an index number, like the CPI. And the percentage change in the CPI, the percentage change in this index from one year to the next year, is the inflation rate.